Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Erin Auerbach. I teach journalism at Bakersfield College. I'm very happy to be here today with my co-moderator, Haley Duvall. Haley is,
Hello.
hi, Haley, and Haley is current editor-in-chief of the Renegade Rip, and she is a fantastic young journalist, so it's fantastic that she's doing this with me. I want to introduce our panel. So we have an incredible panel today. And I'm just going to give everyone just a quick line of introduction, and then I'm going to ask the panelists to do the talking because Haley and I really just want to be facilitators in all of this. But just to give a short introduction, we have Mark Arax, and he's an award-winning magazine writer and author of the book, The Dreamt Land, Chasing Water and Dust Across California. We have Olivia Garcia. She's a professor of history at Bakersfield College, a former journalist and author of the book Rising, the First 50 Years at California State University, Bakersfield. We have Jose Gaspar, and he's a news anchor and reporter for Telemundo Bakersfield and KGET. We also have Lois Henry, and she is the chief executive officer of SJV Water. It's an independent nonprofit news site dedicated to covering water in the San Joaquin Valley. We have Joe Moore, president and general manager of KVPR. And we have Reina Oleguez, the executive director of South Kern Soul, a youth-led media outlet in Kern County. So welcome, everyone. We're so glad you're here today. First, if you wouldn't mind, I would really love to just kind of informally go around and have each of our panelists talk a little bit about your background, your connection to the Central Valley, how long you've lived here. We could go alphabetically if that makes you most comfortable. Mark, we could start with you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm a Fresno boy. Uh, Went to Fresno State, got involved in the journalism program there. We had an incredible professor named Roger Tatarian who was the editor-in-chief of UPI and then came back home after a heart attack to Fresno and then built up the journalism department there to one of the leading ones in the country. Went off to Columbia, got my master's, and then went to the Baltimore Evening Sun, got a taste of the East Coast, a big city, then came back. My mom was sick with cancer, came back to take care of her and got a job at the LA Times, and then came back to do my first book about my father, and the Times said, why don't you just stay in the Valley? And so I ended up establishing the first kind of national bureau covering the Central Valley. And I just roamed and did anything I wanted. It was a great job. And then that led to a second book, a third book, a fourth book, and then I eventually left, and now I'm just writing books about trying to figure out, I started off in my own backyard, now trying to figure out the whole state. That's it.
Awesome, that's very cool. And Olivia?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for... Okay, here we go. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Olivia. I teach history.
Olivia's cutting out a little bit.
I keep getting muted for some reason.
Yeah.
I teach history at Bakersfield College, but I actually spent a good amount of my time as a journalist. Prior to that, I spent about altogether 20 years as a journalist, most of it at the Bakersfield Californian, where I was a reporter. I also was editor of El Californiano, which was a bilingual paper there, and I was also editor of Lois knows because that was part of her baby too, and editor of Moss Magazine and then Bakersfield Life magazine. So I also went to Fresno State too. There's a couple of us from Fresno State. I got my degree in journalism and Chicano studies, and then I later got my master's in history at CSUB, but I'm also a BC alum too, very proud of that. So aside from that, I teach journalism and comm classes part-time at CSUB, and really proud of the book I put together on the history of CSUB on Rising. And right now I'm just working on doing research on the farm worker movement, mostly focusing on the role of women.
Thank you, Olivia. And Jose. Oh, you're muted.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Jose Gaspar. As you mentioned, I am with currently with Telemundo and KGET. Been here for 4 years. Before that, 28 years over at KBAK. Total years in journalism. Oh, wow. You have to make me think now. Somewhere near 35 years, I guess. Started out actually in radio, of all places, at a Chicago Boys Club that had a local radio station in the neighborhood there, and that sort of piqued my interest, and I got involved in news. And so ever since then, I pursued it in college. I'm not from Fresno State. Actually, I went to San Jose State, and but I grew up in Chicago and came out here because of the job. Worked for an NPR type station in Salinas for a while. Then went down to San Diego at KPBS FM down there, San Diego State. Then sort of got involved by TV by accident when a news director called me and said, "Hey, I'm looking for a reporter to come work in El Centro on the Imperial Valley border with Mexicali." And I said, "Well, I work in radio." She said, "Yeah, but TV is like radio with pictures. And so, if you come down at least for an interview." Long story short, she convinced me. I was there for a year, came to Bakersfield in 1988. I've been here ever since. It's gone by incredibly quick. Max, I just want to mention that I recall reading your stories in the LA Times back in the 90s. And I always look forward to when I saw your byline, because you knew it would be a good story about the Central Valley, covered many topics. And so that was always good to see. And so now I am here at Telemundo, sort of made the, started actually out in Spanish language radio, went to English, and now I'm back in Spanish language again. And every once in a while, I'll do something for KGET, but I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And Lois?
Well, so I'm also part of the Bulldog Mafia. I grew up in Fresno, went to Fresno State. We'll forgive Jose for going to San Jose State. Okay. He didn't know. So yeah, I grew up on a ranch east of Fresno, and went to Fresno State. I worked nights and weekends at the Fresno Bee, covering obits and cops and stuff like that. And then came down here, God, when was that? 1990. And I was a correspondent. We don't have those anymore, but we used to have correspondents where I worked for like $40 a story. So I covered the East Kern County and found a lot of stories at $40 a story. You'd be amazed how many stories you can find and how fast you can write those suckers. Anyway, and then they brought me on board full time, and I've covered, I don't know, state government, city government, county government, oil, development, social services, and then I became an editor, which was its own kind of hell. And after about 10 years, I decided I wanted to stab my eyes out with an ice pick if I had to deal with any more personnel issues. So I started writing a column, and that was fun for a while. And then in 2017, I left the paper and I started my little nonprofit, and I'm covering water. And
well, that was a very vivid description. Thank you.
There was murder, there was mayhem. It was, you never know. Like Cosa Nostra, it was amazing.
Absolutely. Joe?
Thank you. Very similar story to Lois. Also grew up on a ranch east of Fresno and also wound up going to Fresno State. But I had kind of have the opposite story of Olivia. My degree actually is in history, and I wound up working in journalism. So bounced around at a variety of radio stations from Porterville to Fresno, Visalia, and eventually began working at the university station. I was hired there to run the university's radio station, and also taught audio production there for a while, but ultimately became program director of Valle Public Radio, which has a station both in Fresno, 89.3, and also Bakersfield, 89.1. And then about 3 years ago, became the president and general manager of Valle Public Radio. And we are the NPR affiliate in Central California, and huge fans of everyone and on this call and the work that you're all doing. Huge admirers of everyone here. That's incredible talent on this in this group here today. I'm honored to be a part.
I agree. I absolutely agree. Thank you. And Reina?
Thank you, Erin, and thank you for inviting me. It's such an honor to be here, part of this amazing panel. A lot of people that I look up to, Louis Henry, Jose Gaspar, and Olivia, and so thank you, everyone. So I was born in Mexico, and my parents brought me to a little town called Wesley in the northern part of the Central Valley. When I was 16, we moved to Bakersfield, and then I've been here all my life. So I consider myself a Central Valley girl because I went to Wesley when I was a year old. My dream job was to be like Norma Gaspar. I would watch Telemundo and, you know, just really like the way that she always informed the community. And that's my passion, just to inform the community about things that are happening that they might not be aware of. And because of different variety of reasons. I went to CSUB, I studied political science, and I minored in communications. I had amazing role models or professors. Judith Pratt is one of those that really taught us how to write and to really, you know, just trust yourself. And then later I went to work at Radio Campesina, where I helped produce public service announcements. So I would voice them, and it was really nice. It was my first introduction to journalism or communications. And but most importantly, educating our community, right, around important things that are happening. And then I did a short internship with Telemundo. And in 2013, I got the opportunity to join South Kern Sol, which is a nonprofit organization focused on training young people to shine a light on issues that impact their communities, because sometimes news doesn't get to Arvin or Lamont or Delano. And so we feel that we're filling that void there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You guys, I'm really honored to be here too as a journalist student to ask you guys so many questions. For the first question we have, who are some of your journalistic or literary influence? Let's start alphabetical order again. Mark? You're on mute.
Oh, you're on mute.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Wow, that's weird. I don't know how that button got pushed to mute. So I grew up kind of just reading, you know, everybody, and I had the privilege as a kid to know William Saroyan, who was the great, you know, storyteller. He was a friend of my grandfather, who was a poet, and I would drive. Saroyan just rode bicycles. He didn't drive, so I would drive him here and there as a 16, 17-year-old kid, and I would ask him, you know, really impertinent questions, you know, like, why did he type standing up? You know, just silly things like that. I wish I would have know what I know now to be able to go back and really and interrogate him about the life of writers and the imagination and all that. You know, and I just read just various people, from Carrie McWilliams to Steinbeck to Joan Didion. You know, those are principally my early influences. Then I went off and branched into all sorts of different literature, ethnic literature and things like that, beyond the Armenian community, which I'm a member of. So yeah, I was growing up, I can't say that we had a lot of books around the house. My father was a farmer who turned into a grocery man, and then he opened up a nightclub, a very powerful, big nightclub. That was the most popular nightclub between San Francisco and LA. And we had an Encyclopedia Britannica. You know, my dad had a football scholarship to USC, but dropped out, came back to work on the farm. So there were no college graduates in our family. So we had the Encyclopedia Britannica. I remember there was a junior set that was like this beautiful red cover, and then the heavier ones that were once you graduated from the junior set on. And we had the Bible, and then my dad had Eldridge Cleaver's Soul on Ice. Story of the black militancy and he picked up a lot of sayings out of that, and would end up, he was mixing a lot of races in his nightclub. Chicanos, El Chicano played there, Chuck Berry. So it was I would go there on weekends, and I think more than the books I read, I was influenced by that bar and the people that came in and out of it.
Thank you, Mark. Olivia?
So for literary, I would say I loved reading Jerry Soto. He was a Chicano poet, Chicano author from the Central Valley. He talked a lot about Fresno and growing up in Fresno, but I connected to it because I was from Bakersfield, and there's a lot of similarities, even though we try to have jokes with each other between both cities. Juan Felipe Herrera is like beyond one of my major influences as far as getting me to write, think more creatively, but also just channeling a lot of my culture and my identity. And, of course, as you know, he was a professor at Fresno State in the Chicano Studies program. Went on, he was named California Poet Laureate. President Obama named him the US Poet Laureate. And he's just an all-around wonderful, great mentor. Love them to death. But they're also local people journalistically, if I think about that. Kathy Freeman was my journalism professor at Bakersfield College, and she really pushed me. She really got me out of my zone when it came to as a writer, as a reporter. And I love that experience, and it carried on when I eventually went to the Bakersfield, Californian. Lois Henry's another one. Lois Henry pushed me also and got me out of my comfort zone. And, a lot of my writing and my reporting, I really thank them for really getting me to step beyond my my little safe zone and just kind of step out and find those stories that haven't been told or overlooked. And they really gave me that platform and encouraged me to do that. Even my colleagues, I learned so much. Jose Gaspar, one of them, Lionel Martinez, I learned a lot from my colleagues and even members of the Fresno Bee staff. That was my first part-time job when I was going to Fresno State. It was a great experience, and I learned a lot by just watching and listening. So those are some of the main core people who helped influence me.
Thank you, Olivia. Jose?
Yeah, so if I understand the question correctly, it's who were some of my influences? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, yeah, like everybody else, it's a little bit of everything, obviously, because you can't avoid the, where you grew up in. I grew up, my youth in Chicago, comparable to East Bakersfield here. That's the kind of neighborhood that I grew up in. And so obviously I was influenced by the times and what was happening back there, then and there, and a little bit of everything. I wish I could say that I had a teacher mentor that, said, hey, by no means was I any outstanding student in high school. I'll tell you that. I was pretty much a C average student, but I remember being bored to death in a lot of the subjects. And then my education really didn't begin until I went to college, when that really opened up my eyes, to real learning and see what was happening, learning to analyze and criticize and then think critically about what was going on. But I always enjoyed reading Studs Terkel, for example, Mike Royko, the columnist with the Sun-Times back in Chicago. I like their style, the way they attacked, not attacked, but approached, you might say, a subject. And I liked reading authors that dealt with investigative journalism. One of the columnists that I read was a columnist for the Mexican newspaper Reforma by the name of Manuel Buendia. And he was a columnist that was ahead of his time, you might say. He aggressively went after just about anybody and everybody in government, the military, and exposed corruption, which was essentially signing his own death sentence. And in fact, in 1985, that's what happened. He was coming out of his office in Mexico City, downtown in a very classy neighborhood in Mexico City, and somebody, just point blank comes up and shoots him and kills him. His killer has never been brought to justice. What a surprise. And so, but he wrote so much stuff, and I remember he uncovered the CIA director 3 times in a row in Mexico City, exposed who he was. And the last one he exposed was John Gavin. At that time was the ambassador to Mexico, and Gavin revoked his U.S. visa and said, "You are persona non grata in the United States." I had the good fortune to talk to him one time, interview him at length in Mexico City one time. And he explained why he did it. And he felt that there was a lot of stuff that he felt that just was not being told, not just in Mexico, but in countries all over the world, including the US. And I thought that was really true. So essentially my influences were just about thinking critically and getting to the heart of the matter, the truth of the matter. And there's so many, as Louis mentioned, there are so many stories out there in the Central Valley here in Kern County that unfortunately are not being covered for a variety of reasons. We've seen a diminishing newsrooms, print probably the most impacted out of everybody. But same thing with TV and radio, just don't have the personnel like we used to. And so Arvin gets left out, Lamont gets left out. When even mention Lost Hills, the small towns where there are people that have stories and issues that are happening. And if you take a look at TV news, especially, 90%, I would say, is all about Bakersfield. Bakersfield. So what about Ridgecrest? What about Delano? What about the other areas? Those are not covered. When I got here in '88, I remember the Californian had correspondents covering, Maria Machuca would cover Delano or Arvin or whatever. And others would cover different areas, and then that got slowly going by the wayside. And unfortunately, those areas do not get covered anymore. So I am encouraged by South Kern Soul, and they're covering those areas. And now the thing is to make sure that people are listening and we get those stories told. So in a nutshell, I probably went off track, but that's about it.
Wow, thank you, Jose. Louis?
Well, I always wanted to be Edna Buchanan, and if you ever want to read anything by her, my favorite book in the whole world is The Corpse Had a Familiar Face. So that pretty much sums up my aspirations in journalism right there. But like everybody else, I learned a lot from all of my colleagues, including Mike Trihey. And I might have to use a swear word here. He taught me two things, two things I still use to this day. If you wanted to be loved, you should have been a fireman, number one. If you've ever had to say, harsh things about people in the media, you are not loved. And so he always set me straight on that, man. You're not a fireman. You're not going to be loved. Get over it. And then the second thing is you have got to, very high up in your story, give me a why do I give a shit graph. I don't care what else you do, but you better tell me why I give a shit within like 3 graphs or no one's going to read your story. So I'd say those are my biggest influences, but I think that Jose really hit on some really key issues here. And I see that somebody had asked, what advice would you give to someone pursuing a career in journalism? We have got to, it is absolutely imperative for us as a society to figure out how to have credible journalism as a regular thriving part of our society. And I don't mean Facebook gossip or, the live streaming stuff that seems to be popular where these guys just go out and film wrecks and stuff like that. That's, okay, there's I guess a thrill perspective to that. But I cannot tell you, and I hope maybe Jose can help out too here, the number of government agencies that are basically just flipping the bird at journalism these days. Like they drag, I still to this day have a public records request out that I submitted in January for something that is absolutely public information, and I cannot get these people, and it's a public agency. So they know that I'm not going to sue. I don't have the means to sue. They know that, there's just not the oomph that there was. And we have got to figure this out because, as much as everybody, watches the national news and all that kind of stuff, it's happening in the little towns. Like Raina said, it's this is where in the tiny school districts are the ones that you're going to see the worst embezzlement. You're going to see, we've seen it all, right, guys? We've seen that happening in these tiny little places, and the abuse of rights and the abuse of people's money and taxes and policies and stuff. And if we and you just see it ramping up and up and up without the journalists. So that's my plug for. I don't know the answer. I'm running a nonprofit, you know, and Raina's running a nonprofit, and you know, that's all well and good as long as people, you know, I guess feel like they have enough money to give you, but we've got to figure out some way to fund these kinds of efforts. And I think it's absolutely a wonderful, I'm not going to, a lot of people might say, don't go into journalism to young people, but I think that it's the most noble thing you can do if you can figure out a way to, you know, pay for your Cheerios. But that's just my plug there.
Thank you, Louis. Joe?
Yeah, echoing a lot of the comments thus far as early influences, but you know, I remember very early on, I mean, before the age of 10, just being a voracious reader of the Fresno Bee. Probably didn't have a clue what exactly was going on, but I definitely remember reading the two columnists that were very much in the paper those days, Woody Laughlin and Eli Setensich and their work, and Jim Boren and the others who were at the Bee at that time. And then around age 12, my dad was given as a birthday present a copy of this coffee table book. Some of you may have seen it. It's called California's Great Central Valley, and it was written by Gerald Haslam, Stephen Johnson, and Robert Dawson. There's incredible photography in the book, but that really captured my interest and made me look at where called home in a different way. And you know, I got to know Gerald over the years, and it was so sad to hear of you know, his passing. And so I would definitely consider him a big influence. And then going on in my education, probably more than anyone would be my high school journalism teacher, David Menendian at Clovis High School, who did an incredible job running the student paper there, The Cougars Growl, and really got me interested in journalism in a different way. I didn't wind up getting my degree in that area, but I always had that in my interest area. And then, you know, Jose talked about Studs Terkel, and I would echo that as well. And one of his fellow devotees, NPR host Scott Simon, really made a big influence on me, and the way that he would conduct an interview, whether it was a human interest interview or something that was dealing with someone really controversial or a public figure. He just had this most amazing way, to my ears, of being able to have a conversation, to be able to get information out of people and do it in a really respectful way, but also respectful of the truth and the facts, and respectful of the audience. And that made a huge impact on me as a young person as well. So those are some of the influences I would cite.
Thank you, Joe. Reina?
I think I was inspired by Leonel Martinez. When I was in South High School, I remember looking forward to Thursdays because his column would come out there. Olivia Garcia, I remember, you know, just the Latino name, right? That really just calls a person like me. And Jose Gaspar, I was really inspired by Mike Trihey, the way that he would, you know, just sometimes touch base with me as an intern there and tell me, you're going to go with this reporter and this is what you're going to ask. And I just felt so empowered to go to the courthouse and ask that question. And I remember asking the question, and all of the young reporters, you know, turned around to see who asked that question. I felt so amazing that day. And then Norma Gaspar, I'm an avid reader of the New York Times, the LA Times, and I also love this website called Rough and Tumble, because it really compiles a lot of different you know, kind of like the highlights of California, and I really love that. There was another young person, his name was Carlos Ortiz, El Cabeza de Lumbriz, and he was a radio personality at Radio Campesina, but he really inspired his listeners to like think critically about political issues. Very inspired by him. He left really early, but that's someone who really inspired me. But I've always wanted a show like his.
Thank you, Reina.
Well, I'm going to ask the next question, but before I do, I have to say, I love that line. If you want to be loved, become a firefighter. I'm going to use that on my students. Thank you, Lois. Thank you, Mike Trihey. It's awesome. I can't wait. I can't wait. It's just like, when is the fall semester going to start so I have the opportunity? All right, so for the next questions, we don't need to go in alphabetical order. Please just feel free to speak out and answer as you feel comfortable. And the next thing we wanted to ask was, how do you find your stories? And has the way that you found your stories, has it changed with technology and times, or do you still kind of go to those kind of old grassroots ways that you would find stories even before we could, have everything dinging on our phone constantly?
I'll go. I wish I could find a way to stop finding stories. There's so many damn stories out there. I don't have enough time to cover as many stories as pop up. It's a combination of old technology. To me, has helped me find sources occasionally, or worked as a tip sheet, just something that's happening that I wouldn't necessarily, that's not like an official, but I cover a lot of what I cover when it has to do with water happens in meetings, public meetings. And so I'm, in fact, I hate to say this, but the COVID thing has been actually pretty handy for me, because I couldn't go to Sacramento, 3 times a month to cover meetings that they used to have up there for, the water board, the state water board, the regional water quality control board, et cetera. And so, when this happened, they started having the meetings online. It's been really easy for me to be able to monitor that stuff. And I hope that stays, because all of these public meetings should be as open and transparent and easily accessible and stuff. So, so I do a lot of, going to meetings and reading agendas and talking to people. I also, very old fashioned, but I still do it. I have a beat call list. I have 2 people a day that I call once a month, right? So, at the first of the month, it's, Dina Nolan up at the Madera County thing, or, somebody in Corcoran or whatever, and I call them and, hey, what's going on? Anything new? What's happening? And I haven't talked to you for a while. And then the next day it's somebody else, and then somebody else, and somebody else, and somebody else. And you just work that way through that until that's how you build up your, who you talk to. And I firmly also believe that meeting in person, and that's a little hampered with COVID, but talking to people on the phone, they want to hear who you are, they want to know who you are, they want to see your face. It builds trust and it builds real human relationships, as opposed to what I used to see when I was an editor before I was going to stab myself in the eye with an ice pick. Even back then, these young people just want to email. It's very easy to ignore an email. It's very easy to ignore an email. It's a lot harder when you get like 3 phone calls from the same person, and finally you go, what do you want? Who are you? And then you hear a voice. And anyway, it's human interaction.
All righty, well, I'll second that emotion. I think that's exactly, I still rely mostly on old fashioned, pounding the pavement. Technology definitely has improved, has helped a heck of a lot in doing research, no doubt about it. I'm doing a story about whatever, and the internet, is invaluable. You just don't depend on Wikipedia, of course, but you find some good sources. But essentially, in finding stories, they come to, a lot of them, like Lois said, they come to you. And I think a lot of has to do, if you've been around for a while, then people sort of, they either they believe they know you, or they've seen your face, and they've known that you've been around for a while, and so they'll call you, and so that always helps. And just by people coming to you, and they feel that they trust you, and they can confide in you. Unfortunately, I still get ignored a lot. I think more of my calls get ignored than get accepted, they get called. And so you have to constantly keep calling people. And I also have public records, requests out that have never gotten back to me. Or as you mentioned, they know that, it's essentially, we're going to ignore you. What are you going to do about it? So what? And nowadays, news organizations being bottom line, they're so tightwad with the money that before I recall, at least when I was with Channel 29, that they actually would spend some money on some lawyers because we felt we had a right to some information and we weren't getting that information, and lawyers would step in and actually, do something. Nowadays, I don't recall any news organization, at least here locally, that is willing to spend some money, get some lawyers, and, unless, we're being sued, then that's another matter. But just to go after a story or for journalism matters, not happening. And unfortunately, that's the reality nowadays. But at least for me, it still depends on really just old-fashioned work. And that's the way making those beat calls is extremely important, and people finding out that, yeah, okay. And once in a while, if I didn't make them, they would call me, and say, hey, you didn't call me. I thought you'd know about this or that, blah, 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 blah. And that would work out. Then, of course, just people, stopping you sometimes when you're in the grocery store, and they'll say, don't tell anybody, but here's what I found out, blah, 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 blah. And that's another way. So that's essentially what's worked for me.
I haven't been a reporter in a long time, but I know that the one thing that always worked for me was getting out in the car and driving. I covered at one point Southeast and East Bakersfield. It was the paper's attempt to do a better job at reporting and covering those communities rather than showing up whenever there was a crime. And I had to learn how to build trust, because even though I was excited, I loved it because I grew up in the area. They saw me as the newspaper. So my job was to get out there and just drive around, stop, talk to the store owner, talk to the seniors playing dominoes at California Park. It's now renamed. Drive around and talk to the grandmother who was putting her roses and tending to her roses in the front yard over there off of, Oswell. And because of that, and stepping out of the zone and getting to know people and introducing myself, I found some amazing stories. I established some great sources from the Friendship House, where Terry McClanahan was a leader. She was part of the big McClanahan family, strong history there. From the Mexican American Opportunity Foundation with Magda Menendez, longtime activist in our community, to Isaiah Crompton, who I met because he was working on a community garden. And he slowly opened up and trusted me, but it took a while, because the whole idea was, why are you here? Are you just here for one thing? And that's that. And that's often the challenge that we find. But my goal was to just get to know regular people and establish relationships with them, because the politicians were always in the paper. But I wanted to get those voices. That was very important to me.
It's also been a few years since I've been out there doing stories myself, but just to echo what Olivia and others have said, yeah, it's about getting out there in the communities. Technology is great. You can do a lot of different audience engagement activities and things like Zoom, like this, and that's really been helpful. But there is no replicating going out there and building relationships in these communities, especially in the small towns. We're later this year going to be launching a project called The Other California, again, borrowing from Gerald Haslam. He actually we recorded an interview with him a while ago as part of the send up to this, but it's, and I should also add, a Cal Humanities funded project. But we're going to be launching a podcast that's having our reporters embedded in 7 different Valley communities over the 7-episode podcast, and we're looking for small towns and really trying to find the richness in stories and build those relationships and bring those to our air, and also do engagement activities both in the reporting process but also after the fact, and continue those relationships so it's not just a one and done and you never hear from us again if you live in Pixley, or if you live in Woodlake, or if you live in Lamont. So we're excited about that. But as much as technology, you can go on Twitter, you can look at all these meetings online and get the agendas and find out what's happening there. There is no replicating building an actual relationship, whether that's over the phone, whether that's on Zoom, or ideally in person.
In the 17 years I worked for the LA Times, I probably got assigned 4 or 5 stories. Everything was generated by myself. If there was a fire, I'd have to cover that. I did it. I was very grudgingly did those kinds of things. I was assigned to do Cesar Chavez's funeral. That was quite a memorable piece. But everything else was my ideas. It was enterprise, and I just got. I'll tell you a couple different ones. There was a cancer cluster in McFarland, California, and it had been covered and covered and covered. And my editor said, go back out and update the cancer cluster, what's going on in McFarland. And I drove to McFarland, walked into the city manager's office, and he said, oh my God, another cancer cluster story. And I said, well, what else is going on here? He says, come on, hop into the car. So I hopped in the car, he took me by the high school, showed me the side of the gymnasium, and there were 6 silhouettes of the state of California. And he said, those are 6, I think it was 5 at the time actually, those are 5 state championships. And I said, they are? I said, in what? He said, cross country running. And he said, we're going for 6 in a row right now. And I said, where are the kids? Where are the coach? Drove me a couple blocks. We waited outside this house, a very small little stucco house, under a tree that was dropping all sorts of, almost like cotton. And these boys all gathered. They were all Mexicans. And the coach walked out, and he was white. His name was White. They called him Blanco. And that began a journey. I called up my editor and I said, I want to spend 3 months following the boys of McFarland. He said, you got it. And so they gave me a bicycle. I rode right next to Coach White, and we ran, and we basically bicycled behind these boys. And their story was essentially that in the summer, they would be brought to their knees working in these fields, and then they would come home, eat something, change out of their farm worker clothes, put on their running clothes, and they would run through these same fields, almost conquering the fields that had brought them to their knees during the day. And we followed them. I followed them for 3 months, and it was a great privilege to run to do that story. It got turned into a movie. It nearly won a Pulitzer Prize, and that's the way I did my stories. Driving down 99, I discovered these shacks that looked like they'd been lifted out of the Mississippi Delta, 1930s. I drove over the railroad tracks into a vineyard, knocked on the door, and out came a man near 100 years old, a black man. And he told me the story of how he had followed the Cotton Trail west from Louisiana. And he showed me, he had an outhouse in the back, and this shack that was, chickens get a better roost than this man lived in. And I said, are there more like you? And he said, across the way, there's a whole community. And that began a 3-year project on the Black Okies. No one had ever told the story of African Americans who migrated out of the South and Southwest, didn't go to the big city, didn't go to Chicago, didn't go to Detroit. If they came to California, they didn't go to Oakland or LA. They came to the middle of California because they wanted to keep alive that rural ethic. And that's where I found them. And I recorded something like 300 hours of their oral histories. They're all gone now. Those histories I'm now converting to digital because I taped them all on tapes. I found the Oaxacans in Lamont and Arvin and Kerman and spent a whole year following one Oaxacan family across the border. That piece was called The Summer of the Death of Hilario Guzman. The photographer was Matt Black, who took these extraordinary photographs, very much like Dorothea Lange. We worked together on a lot of pieces. So I had the privilege of having all sorts of time to do very in-depth, excavations of people's lives. I had the privilege of being Armenian and crossing cultural, ethnic, and racial barriers and borders and going into other lives. Today, I don't want to get preachy here, but today it's almost like if you're a journalist or a writer or a novelist, you almost have to take a litmus test now to qualify to do a story. And I don't think you can tell a storyteller where they can go. They can go anywhere. Now, if they go into a culture that they're not familiar with, that's outside of theirs, their challenge is ever greater. The bar is set ever higher. And all of us can then look at that and say they failed or they succeeded. I picked up a book about a year ago called American Dirt. It was the story of a family that had crossed the border, and the writer was not Latino, and she had not a Latina, and she had utterly failed in telling that story. She had the right to tell it, but she got it wrong because she didn't do the work that you needed to do to be able to go inside another culture and dare to tell their story. And that's what I've done for 30 years almost. And it's been a great privilege, and still trying to get it right. That's why I keep doing these books. I grew up dumb to my place, and I think if you do this thing right, you end up dying a little less dumb.
Max, I recall that series that you did in the LA Times about McFarlane, about the runners. I remember when it came out, and I read it and I said, hey, did you guys see this? I showed it to my other fellow reporters and the sports director back at that time. Of course, he would cover sports as sports, but not what was behind it. It was a great series, by the way. Congratulations.
Yeah, those kids, I went and visited them not too long ago. They're not kids anymore. They're men, and their sons and daughters are now part of the cross-country program. It's quite a tradition over there. So that was thank you.
I could go in and just talk a little bit about where our stories come from. And it's really the young people, right, that they live in the communities that they write about. And when we do our orientation, we tell them, put your journalism hat on. The best stories come from talking to people. Talk to people, and then they come back into our editors meeting that we have every week, and they pitch the stories. And those have been some of the best stories that we've ever published on South Current Soul. And then also, like Jose Gaspar mentioned, it's just knowing people. People call me, text me, and tell me, hey, did you see what this board did over here? And so they come to us because they have a relationship with us, that they trust us. And so we try to report those stories, and also hopefully, it inspires other publications in Kern County to also report on these stories. That's what we're about in South Kern Soul.
I'm sorry, I'm letting this all marinate and trying to ingest all of this because it's so good and it's so important for young people to hear too. I think a lot of young people are very attached to their phones, and like Lois was saying, it's very hard because they want to text or email interviews and they don't want to call people. Poor Haley is constantly telling students, call people. Don't just send an email on Monday and say, oh, I never heard from them. Call them, follow up. So that's very true. And Mark, that I love the whole McFarlane story. That's absolutely amazing. And yes, I was a fan of the movie too. And I wondered what the genesis of all of it was. So it's very cool to hear. You want to ask the next question?
Okay. I was a fan of the movie too. It came out like right after when I graduated high school, and it was one of my influences to get into journalism, which after looking at the backstory. So the next question is, how do you find your stories, in your journalistic writing experience about the region, what do you think is a story of the Central Valley that is unique or pressing importance?
You're talking about one that's been told or not told?
Been told or not told too?
Well, I think immigration and agriculture is very important because in the Valley, ag is one of the drivers of the economy, but it connects so many people in different ways. You have, of course, the farmers, but there is, of course, the farm working community, and you have undocumented immigrants who are also here for work. And you have the children, you know, who are of, you know, my grandparents worked the fields, and my grandpa was a UFW member. So, I mean, that kind of also segues to the UFW, which is like a big social movement in itself. And they're still advocating on a number of issues. You know, you think about COVID and how we're talking about equity and making sure all the vaccines were distributed in an equitable way. But what about the farm workers who have to go every day, and how were they getting access? So I think immigration and agriculture it's been a common theme, and it's still a very important theme because it affects our community in so many different ways. And we still need to kind of stay on top of that, especially for the workers and their families and immigration.
So I think that the education system fails all of us growing up here. I went to Tenaya Junior High School. We played baseball and football against Wawona Junior High School, Ahwahnee Junior High School, Sequoia Junior High School, Yosemite Junior High School. I didn't know who Tenaya was until I started researching my books. Tenaya was the chief of the Awanachee tribe. Okay, they lived in what we know as Yosemite Valley. In 1853, the Mariposa Battalion, the settlers coming in and really participating in what became a half-century long genocide of the natives. They went into the Yosemite and they were getting out the last defeated bands of the Awanachee, and they were hiding. Chief Tenaya's son came out, the Mariposa Battalion murdered him. He came out, maybe 50, 60 others came out of their hiding places. And as he stood there beside the body of his son, he uttered a curse against the white man. That curse is in the Dreamt land, my last book. That's a long way of saying that I grew up, we were the Tenaya Braves. No one told me who Chief Tenaya was. I didn't know any of the history of this place. I didn't know that there was a Tulare Lake that was the most dominant feature on the California map. 4 distinct tribes of Yokuts lived along its shores, fished its waters. The lake was shallow. It's where the Kings and the Kui and the Tule and in the Kern and the heavy snowmelt years would come behind and make this lake that was 880 square miles, the most dominant feature on the California map. It had been erased by the diversions by agriculture and the cotton growers who then went to the lake bottom and created a new plantation there. Our kids don't know these stories. You guys don't know these stories. You know, you're reading your daily newspaper. That's not enough. The daily newspaper is covering crime and things like that. You got to get out. You got to get out, and the past is just a couple inches deep in the soil. Dig for it. And what went on then is going on today. You know, that erasure of the natives. Well, we're having new erasures now. Okay, we're erasing the land and trying to reinvent it in a way that isn't even, isn't even taking into account California's own volatile climate change, and now we have global climate change on top of it. So you've got to be rooted in the past, understand the past. We've got to start teaching these stories. We're not, when I go to these English classes in high school, they're not teaching the books of California. They're not teaching the storytellers. I don't know that they're teaching Gary Soto, okay? They're not teaching Soroyan, I'll tell you that. So I'm now kind of stealing for my talk tonight, so I will shut up now and let the rest of you. I get a little preachy on this subject because I've spent, more than half my life writing about this place and getting into the past, and then it's like it has to be reinvented again, the telling. So I hope the young folks go back to those old people, see the stories they told, and see how that history is relevant and still playing out on this land today.
I would say that, sorry, did somebody else want to go? I'm jumping in here. One of the most uncovered stories, I mean, there's so many stories in the Valley that are uncovered, and Mark's right, and Olivia's right. We don't teach our own history. It's like growing up in the Valley, and I don't know if it's still the same now because I'm no longer young, but it's like that Valley is looked down on. Oh, don't we wish we were from San Diego, or don't we wish, we were in this other place, from San Francisco or something, blah, 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 blah. So it's like all the teaching is geared toward the East Coast or other places in the Valley. Sacramento, might get a mention just because it's been the state capital forever. But I mean, the history is so incredibly deep here. And I just always feel like, nobody pays attention to history until you go, hey, do you see that little piece of ground right there that you walk by, every day? Did you know XYZ happened there? Just like Mark saying, I mean, the name of his school was, part of such an amazing and horrible event. And we don't kind of teach that. But hands down, my thing, of course, water, I think obviously is the biggest issue going. I will put a plug in for SJV Water. But if I wasn't doing that, if I started another nonprofit, I would probably call it SJV Justice, because I think that we have some of the most egregious police brutality in this Valley, up and down, all the way. I mean, you go to Stockton and I mean, I don't know if everybody knows this, but almost all the Valley sheriffs are also the coroners. And that has resulted in Stockton, and the story kind of popped up and then it went away, that the police homicides were just basically not being investigated because the coroner, who also happened to be the sheriff, was like instructing the physicians to title them as being justified or what have you. So I think that issue, and it's so hard to do, of course, because we have such a conservative bent, obviously, in the Valley, that a lot of people, when you start saying, anything about the cops, because I used to do it all the time, and people used to tell me that I was, you're lucky nobody comes and breaks into your house, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I'm not anti-cop, I'm anti-bad cop, which of course I can't let the McFarland thing go without mentioning.
Yes.
Macio Diaz just got out of prison last year, one of the runners. And he was really great at running. He ran an illegal drug ring. But anyway, as a Bakersfield cop. So that's just sort of my thing is police brutality, police reform that needs to happen, the secrecy, all that stuff. And I think the Valley has been so overlooked. I mean, I remember when Ferguson happened, and I think it was that week, and I can't remember what town it was in, but there was an Hispanic man who was running. I don't even care why he was running away from the cops. He hadn't done anything. He hadn't hurt anybody, like beat them up or anything like that. He was running away from the cops. They shot him like 10 times in the back, and he was even shot in the bottom of his feet. So I remember reading that, and I was like, where's the protest? It happens so much here with Hispanics. It's just unbelievable. If we went through and looked at all of the officer involved deaths of folks in the Valley, I mean, just hands down, it would be Hispanics, and it would the circumstances around. In fact, I used to keep an officer involved shooting database, because you can't get that stuff. You have to make it yourself. you have to go through the records and do that yourself because they won't give it to you. Another secrecy issue. Anyway, I'm going to stop because I'm just rambling.
Well, look, The Guardian, it was The Guardian that wrote the story that really looked into, you know, the shooting deaths in Kern County.
Right,
I mean,
that's shooting deaths. Saul Saucedo was not shot to death.
Right.
He was brutally murdered.
But yes, so I mean, you know, this is the problem with our local papers. It was a problem before the paper lost all the staff people. The local papers just did not do. I'm sorry. I read the Bee. I read the Californian. I ended up being able to do stories that they just weren't doing. They just didn't have. They didn't have the imagination. They didn't have maybe the courage. There was, you know, there was a kind of closeness between the politicians and the police chief and the editor of the paper. The Valle papers did not do, and I just benefited. I was able to do all those pieces. I mean, we ended up, when you look back at what we did here, California ended up building a prison industrial complex that no society in the history of the world ever built. Okay, and many of those prisons were located in the San Joaquin Valley. And I got a call one day from a guard in Corcoran saying that we're shooting dead inmates because they're fist fighting. My father was murdered when I was a kid, and it was not an easy thing to tell my family that I was going to be going into the prisons and tell the story of these prison guards who were killing, you know, murderers and rapists and drug dealers, just on the pretext of a fist fight. And so that became the genesis of Gladiator Days. Those stories ended up getting picked up by 60 Minutes and things like that. Again, it's seeing the story and then being able to get inside something that's hidden. And there's no short, you know, there's no, the hours that you have to work these things, it's extraordinary. I would say that my career as a writer, as a journalist and then a writer, probably cost me my marriage, you know, because you're doing these things at the same time that you're raising a family. So I know there's a price to pay for it, but it's I think it's something that if we just get outside the office and see and do and get an editor who's encouraging, and it's more and more difficult today, I know that, I think we could start telling these stories. This is a singular place in America. There's no valley like this. The migrations of people have come here and grafted their stories onto it. And if we just saw it as that and told the story as that, it's a canvas like no other. I hope the muse stays with me for another 20 years because I got a bunch more stories to tell. Lois, what she's doing, kind of reinvented herself. She's going after a piece right now. We won't talk about the details of it, but you know, it belongs in a major national newspaper.
And I'm already getting threatened.
Yeah, and she's getting threatened already. So
you know you're onto something good.
Yes.
Yeah, right. Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. Olivia, I'm also glad to hear that you're writing a book about women in the Central Valley. Is that right?
That's the goal. I've been doing research, but it is on the women in the farm worker movement. Yeah.
Well, that's great. That really is great because, you know, everybody just assumes that it's Dolores Huerta and that's it. And that is far from the truth. You know, there's so many other women out there that have been vocal and involved. Dolores just happened to be, you know, one of the more vocal ones, obviously, and she started way, way, way back early with Cesar back in the 60s. But there are so many other women out there that have stories to tell, and there were, you know, just as involved, and it's great. When are you going to finish it? I want to read it.
Yeah, when are you going to finish it?
Oh, that's the hated question.
Right, Mark?
Yeah. Yes. What's your deadline? That you know, then we'll add a year to it. Tell me what is it? Yes.
I could talk a little bit about some of the issues that I feel are not as covered by media across the Central Valley. I think one of them is education equity. You know, there's legislation that happened in 2010 that changed the way schools were going to be funded. And I think kind of investigative pieces, are schools really using the money that's supposed to go to the most vulnerable communities the way that it's intended to? Because in the current high school district, we found that 90% of those funds were being equally distributed among its schools. So I think it's kind of, you know, education equity is a big thing, because that's the prevention that we could kind of start to invest in young people and hopefully in that culture of incarceration that we have in Kern County and across the Central Valley. I think the COVID-19 pandemic, I know it's covered a lot, but like specifically, how is Kern prioritizing the populations that are most impacted? What's the vision, right? How are we going to protect and rebuild and recover from the pandemic? And how are we going to ensure that the communities that are most impacted are prioritized? Health access is another big one. You know, a lot of undocumented brothers and sisters don't have access to healthcare. And so what are they doing when they get sick? You know, they end up getting medicine from Mexico. I think those are kind of those stories that we need to lift up so that people could start seeing like the hardships that our immigrant communities go through. Housing access, affordable housing access is a huge issue. We have a lot of folks right now that are losing their homes or being evicted from their homes. Police brutality, access to drinking water is another one. You know, that's a big deal in rural communities. And there was one more I wanted to mention, and that one is you know, when it comes to the COVID pandemic, you know, why is the Kern County Public Health Department only releasing demographic information related to COVID deaths only once a month?
Jesus.
Right?
That's it all, just once a month?
Yeah, just once a month.
Oh my word, that's criminal.
It is.
And we know that other counties are doing it more often, and that's just not okay when most of the people that are impacted are people of color.
Have any of you looked into foster farms in Livingston and in Fresno? I think there's a story there. I think COVID was running rampant. They did not do the measures they needed to do, and there were unnecessary deaths. I haven't seen that story told right. I'm not sure I've seen it told at all. Can anybody help me on this?
I mean, there have been some reports. I've seen some, I recall seeing some stories in the Fresno Bee, and some TV stations in the Valley have covered it, but essentially they were just that, just one-time hits and then move on to the next story, you know. Yeah, we know that foster farms definitely had some significant situation out there. There was one company here in Wasco as well. I forgot the name of the company here in Wasco as well that also had some.
It was Sunshine, wasn't it? Sunshine's almonds.
Was it? It was an almond one. Yeah, I'm not sure if it was Sunshine or not, but you know which one I'm talking about. But yeah, those stories. Unfortunately, you know, again, you know, they're one-day stories, and they merit more of a follow-up, more in-depth pieces. But I can only speak with TV. You know, we're very superficial.
Yeah.
You know, very, very superficial. Hit it and onto, you know, to the next story, and we never seem to go back and find out what happened and what measures were taken, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I think Jose is 100% right with that last point. That is exactly the problem, both on the immediate stories that are on the agenda right now, the follow-up, but also that institutional memory in our organizations has been decimated by the turnover in our industry. And that has also created a problem in knowing that, hey, we did this big investigative thing 5-7 years ago. well, whatever happened to that? It totally falls off the radar. Editors are different. The people who are working on those stories have gone on to other things, and you know, it's a part of that history problem that so many people have talked about. You know, knowing that history and knowing where the you know, where those areas of focus are. On the Foster Farms thing, our colleague at KQED's Central Valley Bureau, Alex Hall, has been doing some reporting on that.
Good.
And I have a feeling there's more to come from her, but those air on the California report on our station. But I think you're 100% right. There's a lot more to learn and to report on that.
On the institutional knowledge thing, really quick, when they announced that they were going to do the DOJ investigation of the Minnesota Police Department, I was thinking to myself, well, that sounds good and everything, but how many DOJ investigations have there been in Kern County, and what has happened? And that's just Kern County. I mean, I just know that because I can remember when this DOJ investigation came down in 2004 that had been going on for almost 10 years. And the recommendations were just watered down bullshit, and they never even instituted them. And then, you know, and then we had another DOJ investigation after the Guardian thing. And I'm thinking, well, how many of those DOJ investigations happened up and down the Valley, and what has been the result? Because I still see people just getting blown away, you know? So that's one of those institutional things, Jose, that I think if I were still the editor of the Californian, I would have jumped all over that. Like, oh yeah, really? This is great. Sounds wonderful. But what does it really do? And what has it done? Let's look at it and see what's happening in our own backyards.
I know the challenge. I've been kind of on pro bono. I've been some reporters at the Fresno Bee. I mean, they're young, hungry, but they're green. And I've opened up my file cabinets to them. We talk sometimes once a week about some bigger stories they're trying to do. It's really an impossible juggle because they've got to feed the beast with these dailies, and then they can steal a little time to do this longer piece, the longer piece being the thing that people are going to read and remember. So it's hard. I mean, I'm looking at, you know, the LA Times in its heyday, when you could take a year or two to do something. I know that's unfair, but if you could always have a bigger piece that you're juggling with the smaller dailies, and keep that thing, just gather string, it's then those are the pieces that you look back on in your career and say, wow, those are the things that really mattered. They changed a place, they changed whatever. But it's tough. It's really tough.
Yeah, I'm gonna argue with you on that whole doing the daily.
Go ahead. It's not the first time you've argued with me. Yes.
Yes, because I would not be able to be doing this piece that we must, you know, what must not be named, that you and Jose know all about. But if I hadn't been able to get some partners, and this is, you know, again, trying to figure out how we can do journalism better. I'm a member of the Institute for Nonprofit News, and through them got this collaborative thing where I've got an editor and I've got other people, photographers, et cetera, helping me work on this piece that shall not be named. And it's still taking me since December, and I still haven't gotten it done. And in the meantime, I've just been like barely able to throw some stuff up on my website that, you know, is easy stuff for me, because like I know the Kern River issues and stuff like that. So I as an editor, as a reporter, I always argued against the idea of having people do their dailies at the same time as they work their longer piece story, because you get lost. Those longer piece stories, which are super important, the thing that's important about them is tracking down the documents, tracking down the people,
yeah.
You know, putting it all in context and keeping it, you know, lined up. And it's really hard to do when you're doing a million other things, which is why we've got to figure out how to save journalism, Mark. That's
philanthropists, man. We got to get more philanthropist money. and at the same time,
a tax on big tech.
Right. That's right. I don't know. It's sometimes you wonder.
Well, Lois, you just mentioned big tech, and our station is part of an interesting experiment that is underway just very recently. Microsoft approached Valley Public Radio the Fresno Bee, Vida en el Valle, and Radio Bilingüe, which is based in Fresno, and it's the nationwide Latino public radio network. And we've launched a new collaborative that Microsoft is helping to fund. They're funding each one of our organizations and an editor/coordinator position under the Bee. And it's really proving to be really interesting in that the editorial side of it is focused on exploring issues related to COVID-19 and its impact on Latino communities throughout the Valley. But we're for the first time working side by side with our colleagues in print, in English language public media and Spanish language or bilingual public media. And the Fresno area is one of 4 communities that Microsoft is doing this right now as a pilot project nationwide. They're also doing it in El Paso and Juarez, in Jackson, Mississippi, in the Mississippi Delta, and in the Yakima, Washington area, in each case involving ethnic media, public media, and daily newspapers. And, I think it's too early to say what it's how it's going to work. Early results are positive. I think we're having bigger impact with our stories, and they're reaching wider audiences and different audiences than they normally would. And we hope that there might be some interest from Microsoft in making this a more substantial commitment, maybe in our market here in the Valley and beyond. But everyone is right here. Yeah, philanthropy is going to absolutely be key to continued vitality of local journalism and survival, for that matter, of local journalism.
What you guys have done in the last 4 years is pretty extraordinary, Joe. I mean, I really feel when I'm tuning in that I'm getting stories that not a whole lot of people are telling. You've got a great staff, diverse staff. Alice is doing a wonderful job, I just think you guys have become more relevant over the last 5 years.
Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate that. And Alice is doing an incredible job. And I know our host, Kathleen Schock, of Valle Edition, wanted to be on this call today. She has a million things on her plate. She's also a journalism instructor at Fresno City College. I don't believe she was, I think she had a schedule conflict, wasn't able to make it, but she's
a rock star, man. She's good. She's good.
Yeah, we're very lucky.
Yep.
So I don't know how much time we have left, and I would just like to raise one issue and perhaps get everybody's thoughts on this is, so where do we go from here? Because I know there's a lot of young people that are interested in journalism, though I've always been baffled by the term. I majored in communications. I have no idea what the hell that is. I just majored in journalism, and that's what I did. And then later on, this thing called communications came about, and I said, I have no idea what that is. But anyway, my question is this, how do we develop, groom, get the young journalists involved? Because there's work to continue. We're all going to die and go away one time. And so this work has to continue. How do we do that? Especially for bilingual people, Spanish language TV and media is a whole different animal in terms of doing investigations, because, for things that I cannot say publicly right now, it just is tougher.
Sure.
But how do we make sure that this work continues? How do we foster the growth of younger journalists who want to come in and do it? Some seem to be more prepared than others. Others seem to have the drive, but not the preparation per se to get involved. So sometimes I wonder, how is this work going to continue? Who's going to continue it? And how do we encourage them to do it? I'm open to any and all ideas.
Well, I think that it's absolutely unfair to tell young people to get involved in this business if they don't have the expectation of making a decent living with benefits. And I mean, that is really kind of having started this little deal on my own, and Olivia and Mark, you guys all know Joe, I am the last business person there ever. I'm not a money person, right? I'm now a money person because I don't make any money to be able to pay myself through this, but I've hired a couple of interns to do social media, and one's going to be actually starting with reporting. And it's like, I am not going to not pay those people. So, I don't make any money to pay myself, but I'm going to try and pay them at least something, because that is totally unfair. So we got to figure out a way, Microsoft or Craigslist or all of Facebook, these places that just decimated the legacy organizations need to put up some money. And I think it's great, Joe, that Microsoft is doing this, but it's also, I'm wondering, is it a one-off thing? Is it just this one project? Because you're not going to get a Mark Arax who's able to just travel around and find shit out if they're only focused on one thing, because this grant says this is what you've got to do and you've got this much time to do it, and then we want to have metrics, and then see you later because we're going to go spend our money on something else because we're Microsoft and we're flighty or whatever. I mean, it has to be something substantial so that we can pay young people and say, yes, you can have a career, you can have a family that you can destroy by being overly involved in your work, but at least they will have insurance when, that we have to be able to do this. We have to get that basic framework back. And I don't want to be, that downer here, but it's working in the trenches here where I am. It's trying to build something. It's hard. I mean, Joe, every day is a struggle for you guys.
I want to hear from Raina. I want to hear from Raina on that. Because she's out there doing the work right now. How is it? Are you encouraged, discouraged?
I am encouraged. I think that we recently got funding from the McClatchy Foundation.
Oh yeah, good.
Yeah, and one of the pitches that we made to them was that we wanted to start a collaborative of media so that we could start working together. And so we did secure some funding to provide fellowships and to share with other media outlets. It's not a lot, but it's also the start of a 10-year investment in hopefully in our organization to lift up the First Amendment right? Pretty much anything that we want to talk about that's about civic engagement goes on. So I would love to invite you guys to be part of this if you guys are interested. But we get funding from different foundations, and we diversified our funding in the past 5 years. For the longest time, it was only one foundation funding our work, and we thought, are we really real? Like, are other foundations going to start funding? And they did. And then as soon as they did, we started getting more funding from other foundations. And so I'm encouraged by it. I think that the future of media is probably going to be nonprofit. We don't have to be worried about selling to be able to stay alive.
So what happens if Stuart and Linda Resnick come to you and say, we like to give you $1 million to do this? And the Resnicks obviously are the biggest. They're from Beverly Hills, farming here. Their company town is basically Lost Hills and maybe the Avenal, a little bit of McFarland too. What do you do? Because that means that you're not going to be able to cover one of the biggest influencers in the Valley, the extractors, overplanting almonds and pistachios and all that. I spent a whole half a book trying to figure them out. They're very complicated. You can't paint them with a broad brush either way. Joe, you may get funding from the wonderful company. I don't know. What does it mean? So what happens if Linda Resnick comes to you and says, we'll give you $1 million?
Well, we don't have to take the money, right? I think that's one thing. But when we do take money from foundations, we have to have a little bit of shared values. I think that's very important. And when we do get the money, we also know that we also have in our contract, it says that they cannot tell us what we could report on. Yep. It's up to our editor, and it's up to our young people what we want to report on. And I think that's critical.
So that would be a one-time check.
Yes.
But
that would go straight into the endowment.
Yes, and we'll have 5 reporters working Lost Hills. Yes, right. Yeah.
See, this is what I love about journalists. Haley and I had all these questions. We just had to give you a few and then just let you run with them. This has been absolutely amazing. I expect all of you to be in my classes in the fall in person as guest speakers. You all have appointments made. I've made them for you, but this is really, it's so informative. It's so important. And though we weren't able to answer the big question, which is how do we do this? How do we encourage young people to go into this very noble and important profession and promise them that they can make a living? But maybe that's another discussion for another time. We're getting to our ending time, so that was my way of just kind of trying to rein everything in. But I want to thank each and every one of you for participating today. Haley and I were very honored to be asked to co-moderate this panel, and we appreciate all of you. Thank you so much.
Would you do me one favor? Could you get all of our emails and phone numbers so we can communicate with each other in the future?
Absolutely.
Yeah, please.
Absolutely. We'll create.
I'd like to go down to current,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Not a problem. And thank you to everyone who attended. I saw there were great comments in the chat, but I didn't want to let our panelists not have their moments to talk about all these really important things. So we appreciate everyone who's here. Thank you.
Thanks, Jose.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
We'll be talking.
Yep. See you.